Good day, everyone. Our topic is the chapter 12, which is comprehension of the psychology of language. I am Catherine Herrera. I will discuss the introduction and memory for text in inference. And Jeremy Pataho, she will discuss the reference and ambiguity and the models of text processing. And Jensen Hallig will discuss the individual difference in comprehension skills and the neuroscience of text processing. Okay, we will start. By the end of this chapter, we will know how we integrate new materials with previous information. We will understand how reliable our memory really is what we have read or heard. We will appreciate how we make inference about what we are read or hear. We will know how we make inference as we process language. We will know how we represent text. We will understand about the story grammar, schema, propositional network, mental model, and construction integration models of text comprehension. We will know what differentiates skilled from less able comprehenders and know the best way to try understand difficult material. Introduction. This chapter explores the higher level processes of comprehension, which follow the word recognition and parsing. It focuses on the process of integrating thematic roles and individual meanings into a sentence representation. The central theme in the comprehension is whether it is a constructive or minimal process, going beyond the literal meaning of the sentence. Comprehension involves constructing a model of what is being communicated, using this model to make sense of the material. However, it is important to avoid taking comprehension as construction too far, as it is like building a house to live in, not an extravagant mansion. So it says here, language comprehension is the ability to understand the different elements of spoken and written language, like the meaning of the words and how words are put together to form a sentence. Comprehension includes text, discourse, and conversation. So, text is a printed or written material usually longer than a sentence. A story is a particular, self-contained type of text. Although a story is psycholinguistic experiment, might only be two sentences long. Discourse. Discourse is the spoken equivalent of text. And the conversation. Conversation are spoken interchange where the topic may change as the conversation unfolds. Conversation also have their own particular mechanism for controlling who is speaking at any time. It should be noted that most of research has been carried out on the text comprehension rather than discourse comprehension. It is useful to distinguish between semantic and referential processing by Granholm and Oki 1992. Semantic processing precedes referential processing. In incremental parsing models such as Altman and precedes referential processing. In incremental parsing models such as Altman and Steedman in 1988, semantic and referential processing occur on word-by-word basis. An important characteristic of text and discourse is that it is coherent. The material has a topic and forms a semantically integrated whole. Gernsbacher 1990 proposed four sources of coherence. Here are the four coherence of Gernsbacher. First, the referential coherence, temporal coherence, location coherence, and the causal coherence. So, the referential coherence refers to the consistency in who or what is being talked about. Kung sino yung topic, kung sino yung pinag-uusapan. Temporal coherence refers to the consistency in when the events occur. Kailan nangyari? Kailan ito nangyari? And next, the location coherence refers to the consistency in where the events occur. Saan nangyari yung? Saan ito nangyari? And the last is the causal coherence refers to the consistency in why events happen. Bakit ito yung nangyari? We generally assume that we are processing is coherent and makes sense. We assume that pronouns are referring to things that have been previously been introduced. Next, memory for text in inference. Literal verbatim memory is unreliable, as demonstrated by John Dean's memory of the Watergate scandal. His recall of conversation in Nixon office was tape recorded, and his recall was highly inaccurate. Dean's attitude influenced this memory, as he only remembered the gist of previous conversation. Eyewitness testimony is also unreliable. It can be influenced by various factors. Absorption is an important feature of memory, and people generally forget the details of word order quickly. Such 1967 tested participants' ability to distinguish between possible confusion sentence and the embedded sentence in a story. This highlights the importance of abstraction in memory and the potential for misleading question to lead individuals to astray details of the syntax. Potter and Lombardi found the tendency to reuse the same syntactic structure in the material recalled from immediate memory result from syntactic priming by the target material. They showed that it was possible to change the way people appraise the material they recalled by them with priming them with an alternative sentence structure. The importance, not surprisingly, people are more likely to remember what they consider to be the more important aspect of text. Johnson 1970 showed that participants were more likely to recall ideas from a story that had been rated as important by other group of participants. Keenan and McWhinney and Mayhew 1977 examined memory for a linguistic seminar and compared sentences that were considered to be HIC, which is a high interactional content, which is material having personal significance, and sentence, with LIC, low interactional content, which is material having the little personal significance. What effect does prior knowledge have? The effect of prior knowledge on what we remember on the processes of comprehension was explored in an important series of experiments by Bransford and his colleagues. Let's go to the inference. We make an inference when we go beyond the literal meaning of the text. An inference is the derivation of additional knowledge from the facts already known. Might involve going beyond to the text to maintain coherence or to elaborate on what was actually presented. Inference do not always lead to the or elaborate on what was actually presented. Inference do not always lead to the correct conclusion. However, prior knowledge and context and mixed lessons. So the inference served a variety of functions in text comprehension. Among other things, they can be used to identify an unclearly pronounced word, to resolve a lexical ambiguity, to determine the referent of a pronoun, and to compute an intended message from a literal meaning. There are three main types of inference. It's called logical, bridging, and elaborative inference. So the logical inference, it follows from the meanings of words. For example, hearing blood is a bachelor. It enables us to from the meanings of words. Next is the bridging inference. It provides links among ideas to maintain coherence. And the last one is elaborate inference. We make this when we extend what is the text with the word knowledge. The Gerald Martin example is an unwarranted elaborative inference. What are inference made? The constructionist view suggests the inference are involved in constructing a representation of a text, with comprehenders making inference related to the main characters, their goals, and actions. And the text processing is driven of a need-to-know basis, with goals determining inference and understanding the minimalist hypothesis suggests that we automatically make bridging inference to a minimum. Comprehension is data-driven and memory-based. Studies show that elaborate inferences are made automatically at the time of comprehension, but memory measures may distort the pictures of comprehension. To make an automatic inference, appropriate support semantic information must be present in the text.
Reference and ambiguity. An important part of comprehension is working out what things refer to. This is called reference. Reference is the act of referring or consulting. In both, blood and he refers to the same thing, blood the vampire, or at least our mental representation of him. We call the case when two linguistic expressions refer to the same thing. Example, blood and he, co-reference. A common example of co-reference involves the use of pronouns such as she, her, he, him, and it. Example of co-reference is she is happy. Often, we find that we cannot determine the reference of a linguistic expression without referring to another linguistic expression called antecedent. Antecedent is a substantive word, phrase, or clause whose denotation is referred to by a pronoun that typically follows substantive. This case and the material that we cannot identify in isolation is called anaphor. Anaphor is a word or phrase with an anaphoric function. How do we resolve anaphoric ambiguity? In many cases, anaphor resolution can be straightforward. What makes anaphor resolution difficult is that often it is not obvious what the antecedent of the anaphor is. The anaphor is ambiguous when there is more than one possible antecedent. We cope with the anaphoric ambiguity by using a number of coping strategies. Resolving anaphoric reference involves working out who or what should be associated with pronouns and referring phrases. One strategy of anaphor resolution is called parallel function by Sheldon 1974. We can distinguish two groups of further strategies: those dependent on the meaning of the actual words used or their role in the sentence, and those dependent on the emergent discourse mode. The strategies dependent on the words used. One of the most obvious is the use of gender by Corvette and Chang 1983. Accessibility. Some items are more accessible than others. We are faster at retrieving the referent of more accessible antecedents. Accessibility is a concept related both to anaphora and to the work of sentence. The given new contract. One of the most important factors that determines comprehensibility and coherence is the order in which new information is presented relative to what we know already. It has been argued that there is a contract between the writer and the reader, or participants in a conversation, to present new information so that it can easily be assimilated with what people already know. This is called the given new contract by Clark and Haviland 1977, Haviland and Clark 1974. Factors such as common ground cannot restrict the initial search for possible reference, but may be an important constraint in selecting among alternatives. Summary of work on memory references with anaphora. Any model of comprehension must be able to explain the following characteristics. We read, forget, and very quickly forget details of surface form. Comprehension is to some extent a constructive process. We build a model of what we are processing, although the level of detail involved is controversial. At the very least, we make inferences to maintain coherence. One of the most important mechanisms involved in this is anaphor resolution. Inferences soon become integrated into our model as we go along, and we are very soon unable to distinguish our inferences from what we originally heard. There is a foreground area of the model containing important and recent items so that they are more accessible. Model of text processing. We now examine some models of how we represent and process text. AI has heavily influenced models of comprehension, although the ideas thus generated are interesting and explicit. There is a disadvantage that the specific mechanisms we use are unlikely to be exactly the same as the explicit mechanisms used to implement the AI concepts. Propositional network models of representing text. The meaning of sentences in the text can be represented by a network wherein intersections or nodes represent the meaning of words and the connection represent the relations between words. This approach is related to Fillmore 1968 theory of case grammar, which is term was derived from generative semantics, a grammatical theory that emphasizes the importance of semantics. Case grammar emphasizes the roles or cases played by what the words refer to in the sentence. One disadvantages of case grammar is that there is little agreement over exactly what the cases that describe the language should be or even how many cases there are. Propositions are units of meaning relating to things. Propositional networks form a useful basis for representing text, but cannot be sufficient in themselves because they do not show how we make inferences or how some items are kept in the foreground. Foreground again, the part of scene or representation that is nearest to and in front of the spectator. In network models, sentences are first analyzed into propositions. A proposition is the smallest unit of meaning that can be put in predicate argument form with a verb operating on a noun. A proposition has a truth value, that is, we can say whether it is true or false. A proposition is the one who describes if it is true or false. The model of Anderson and Bauer 1973 was particularly influential. Originally known as HAM, short for Human Associated Memory, the model evolved first into ACT, short for Adaptive Control of Thought. C. Anderson 1876 and later ACT, pronounced ACT-STAR, Anderson 1983. A human-associated memory is a type of memory that links together different pieces of information, allowing us to recall events and experience in their context. Ang adaptive control of thoughts is a cognitive architecture and psychological theory that aims to model how humans live, think, and remember. Evaluation of propositional networks models. Just as there is little agreement on the cases to use, so there is little agreement on the precise types of roles and connections to us. If we can measure propositional networks against the requirements listed for memory, inferences, and anaphora, we can see that they satisfy some of the requirements but leave a lot to be desired as models of discourse processing. Most propositional network models show how knowledge might be represented, but they have little to say about when or how we make inferences or how some items are maintained in the foreground or how we extract the gist from the by Johnson, Laird, 1984, Woods, 1975. Evaluation of historiogrammars. A major problem with historiogrammars is in getting agreement on what their elements, rules, and terminal elements should be. In a sentence grammar, the meaning of non-terminal elements such as noun and verb is independent of their content and well-defined. It means, mahirap magkasundo ang bawat isa kung hindi kayo same ng language na ginagamit. There is no agreement on story structure. Virtually every story grammatical has proposed a different grammar. Means, everyone has their own grammar. Kumbaga may sarili tayong recipe sa paggawa ng isang kwento. Story grammars only provide a limited account of a subset of all possible stories. Furthermore, the analogy of story categories with formal syntactic grammar such as NP, VP, and the rules of combination is very weak. Schema-based theories. The idea of schema, the plural can be either schemata or schemas, was originally introduced by Varlet 1932. Varlet argued that memory is determined not only by what is presented, but also by the prior knowledge a person brings to the story. A schema is an organized packet of knowledge that enable us to make sense of new knowledge. The schema gives knowledge organizing activation that means that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Schemas are organized packets of knowledge that have been abstracted from many instances. They are particularly useful for representing a stereotypical sequence, such as going to a restaurant. Scripts. A script is a special type of schema by Shank and Abelson 1977. Script represent our knowledge of routine actions and familiar repeated sequences. Script, in other terms, is something written. Two famous examples are the restaurant script and the attending a lecture script. See Table 12.1. Psychological evidence for the existence of scripts comes from an experiment by Vavel at evaluation of schema and script-based approaches. The primary accusation against schema and script-based approaches is that they are nothing more than the descriptions of the data. This is quite difficult to rebut. Rosenbauer 1981 suggested that schemas have an organizing ability beyond their constituent, but this has yet to be demonstrated of scripts, although the data from McCone et al. Could be interpreted in this way. It is also unclear how particular scripts get activated. It cannot just be by word association. Mental models. Comprehenders construct a model as they go along to represent what they hear and read. If the information is represented in a form analogous to what is being represented, this type of representation is called a mental model. By Johnson, 1983. See also Garnham, 1985-1987. If the information is represented propositionally, this type of representation is called a situation model. By Van Eyck and Kinch, 1983. Although many researchers do not distinguish between the two terms, a mental model directly represents the situation in the text. We form mental models of specific things, and these models can give rise to mental images. Mental models help us to understand things. It also says that comprehension is not only a way to get information, but it also a model in our minds that represent our story. Mental models are not just used in the short term in working memory to interpret text. People have long-term memory for the models they construct, as well as memory for the surface text by Vagili and Payne 2000. The application of mental models is most apparent in representing spatial information. A mental model is a structure that represents what the text is about, particularly preserving spatial information. Updating the model. Text processing is dynamic. As people comprehend text and new material becomes available, they have to update their mental representation. Zwan and Madden show that comprehenders can update situation models with new information that is consistent with the current situation, but inconsistent with the prior situation as easily as material that was never inconsistent with the prior situation. This finding suggests that the most important determinant of updating is what currently available, and new information does not resonate with all information in memory. Kinch Construction Integration Model. Kinch 1988 described a detailed and plausible model of spoken and written text comprehension known as the Construction Integration Model. The Construction Integration Model combines propositional networks, schema theory, and mental models to provide a detailed account of how we understand text. This model emphasizes how texts are represented in memory and understanding, and how they are integrated into the comprehender's general knowledge base. The Construction Integration Model combines aspects of the network, schema-based, and mental model approaches. The Construction Integration Model itself, Kinch 1988, keeps most of the features of the earlier model. The construction phase of processing word meanings are activated prepositions, form, and inferences made by the mechanisms described earlier. Evaluation of the construction integration model. The construction integration model explains main experimental findings. First, the more propositions there are in a passage, the longer it takes to read per word. Kinch and Ken in 1973. Second, as we have seen, there is a levels effect in the importance of a proposition owing to the multiple processing of high-level propositions. Construction integration model by Kinch 1980. Construction phase. Word meanings are activated. Prepositions are formed. Inferences are made. Integration phase. Network of interrelated items is integrated into a coherent structure. Any contradictions or incorrect inferences are resolved. Comparison of models. Story grammars suffer from a number of problems. In particular, it is difficult to agree on what the terminal and non-terminal categories and rules of the grammar should be. Propositional networks and schema models, while providing useful contracts, are not in themselves sufficient to account for all the phenomena of text processing. Of these models, Kinch is the most detailed and promising, and as a consequence has received the most attention. It combines the best of schema-based and network-based approaches to form a well-specified mental model theory.
Individual differences in comprehension skills. Throughout this book, people differ in their ability to process text effectively. For example, less skilled comprehenders draw fewer inferences when processing text or discourse, and are also less well able to integrate meaning across utterances. Oakhill 1994, Ewell and Oakhill 1991. Working or short-term memory is used for storing currently active ideas, and for the short-term storage of mental computations, Baddeley 1990. Differences in working memory span have a number of consequences for the ability to understand text. Singer 1994. For example, a high span will enable an antecedent to be kept active in memory for longer and will enable more elaborative inferences to be drawn. A useful measure of working memory capacity for text processing is reading span as defined by Dainman and Carpenter 1980. People hear or read sets of unrelated sentences. Reading span correlates with the ability to answer questions about text with pronoun resolution accuracy, and even with general measure of verbal intelligence such as SAT scores, a standardized test of academic and intellectual achievements in the USA, standing for Scholastic Assessment Test. Dainman and Carpenter argued that reading span gives a much better measure of comprehension ability than traditional word span scores. On the other hand, it has proved much harder to find effects of memory capacity on elaborative inferences. They are even less good at processing punch things because they are less able to quickly suppress and contextually operate meaning upon Jens Butler 1970. Some cognitive abilities decline with normal aging. Woodruff-Pack 1979. There is experimental evidence that young people are more effective at relating ideas in text. Cohen 1979, Singer 1994. Healthy elder people are less efficient at suppressing irrelevant material than young people. The neuroscience of text processing. Much less is known about the neurophysiology of text processing than about the neurophysiology of many other language processes. This is because text processing and semantic integration really comprise many processes. It is much more straightforward to track down the effects of brain damages on modular processes. Many types of brain damage will lead to some impairment of comprehension ability. For example, people with receptive aphasia have difficulty in understanding the meaning of words. This obviously impairs their ability to follow coherent text and conversation. Some patients with Wernicke's aphasia have difficulty in maintaining the coherence of discourse. They might repeat ideas or introduce relevant ones. Christiansen's 1995. Children with SLI, specific language impairment, or poor at story comprehension and making inferences. The source of their comprehension difficulty in uncertain, limited working memory span might play a role, and it also possible that ability to process information is impaired. In spite of this difficulty, there are reports of people with an impaired ability to understand discourse but without other language impairments. Most of these reports involve right-handed people with right hemisphere damage. Kaplan 1992. For example, such patients have some difficulty in understanding jokes. Brownell and Gardner 1980. Brownell, Michael Powelson and Gardner 1983. Consider the following joke 63 with 3 possible punchlines from Brownell, etc. 1980. The best answer is a correct punchline. I've only worked with him for 100 years. Here's why. Humor, the punchline is humorous because it creates a surprising contrast with the quack's claim and being over 300 years old. The assistant's response implies that the quack's age is exaggerated, making the situation amusing. Coherence, the punchline fits logically within the conversation. It addresses the listener's question about the quack's age by providing a humorous and believable answer that contradicts that quack's claim. The other options are less effective. B. While coherent, it lacks the surprise element and humor that make a good punchline. C. This ending is completely unrelated to a conversation and makes no sense the context. It's example of an incoherent ending as described in this passage. This passage examines how brain damage and cognitive impairments affect language comprehension. Individuals with right hemisphere damage struggle with humor and revising inferences, while those with semantic pragmatic disorder struggle to understanding conversational context. Short-term memory impairment also hinders comprehension, leading to difficulties with complex sentences following instructions and maintaining coherence is discussed. All these impairments highlight a crucial role of various cognitive abilities in understanding language and engaging in effective communication.
In summary, In comprehension, we go beyond word meaning and syntactic structure to integrate the semantic roles into a larger representation that integrates the text or discourse with previous material and with background information. Next, text has a structure and coherence that make it easy to understand. Prior knowledge is important. It helps us to understand and remember material. And changing in perspective can help you remember additional information if the story was easy to understand in the first place. As we read and listen, we make inference. Eyewitness testimony can be quite unreliable, as people confuse inference with what originality happened. It can be misled by the wording of questions. Bridging inference enables us to maintain the coherence of text. Elaborative inference to go beyond the text. Many elaborative inference are made at the time of recall. It's also gender is important to cue the resolving anaphoric ambiguity. Propositions are units of meaning relating to things. Schemas are organized packets of knowledge that have been abstracted from many instances. They are particularly useful for representing a stereotypical sequence, such as going to a restaurant. A mental model is a structure that represents what the text is about, particularly preserving spatial information. The construction integration model combines propositional networks, schema theory, and mental models to provide a detailed account of how we understand text. Working memory span is an important constraint the comprehension ability. Impaired short-term memory disrupts the ability to comprehend text and discourse. And last, dementia reduces the ability to comprehend text and discourse and to maintain a coherent conversation. That will be all in our topic. Thank you.